Good morning, everyone, and welcome to today's webinar brought by the Chartered Institute for Export and International Trade, Alibaba, and the E-commerce Trade Commission, this time on overcoming barriers to online trade. This government has put growth at the heart of its agenda, and international trade is a clear lever for achieving this. Indeed, research from the Social Market Foundation has found that increasing the number of SMEs that export by 70,000 could add £9.3 billion a year to national income and create over 150,000 additional jobs. However, UK exports have stagnated in recent years, partly due to the increasingly complex and uncertain global economic picture. The increasing digitalisation of trade, though, through e-commerce platforms and marketplaces should make exporting easier than ever. So, why is this so difficult? As part of E-commerce Week, a programme of events being led by the members of the E-commerce Trade Commission, the Chartered Institute and Alibaba.com, we're hosting this free webinar to address some of these barriers that many e-commerce businesses face. And I can think of no one better on the next slide to talk you through this. Firstly, we have the Chartered Institute's own Grace Thompson. Grace, how are you doing?
I'm very well, thank you, Phil. How are you?
I'm very well. We have Alibaba.com's Christina. Christina, do you want to introduce yourself?
Sorry. Hello. Hello. Hi. I'm Christina from Alibaba.
And we finally have Richard Hyde from the Social Market Foundation. Richard, how are you today? Do you want to quickly introduce yourself?
I'm not too bad, thanks. I hope everybody else as well. I'm a senior researcher at the SMF and author of the report that I think I'm going to say a few things about.
Brilliant, thank you everyone. We'll hear from everyone in a second. And you can see a QR code to the E-commerce Trade Commission's website here. However, just while we get everything ready, we have a Q&A section. I'm just going to run you through the normal housekeeping rules. But firstly, I want the launch of our first polls. So how important are online marketplaces to your businesses? Do not use them. Use them, not very important. Use them, but neither important nor unimportant. Use them, somewhat unimportant, or use them important. Please do fill out these polls. They are quite useful to us in our outreach, and they do help us inform some of our decisions going forward. Firstly, we do have a Q&A section at the end. Feel free to answer questions through the chat. We only ask you keep the questions as brief as possible. Also, try not to make them too sector or industry specific. It makes it a bit easier for me to ask everyone, ask our panel of experts a question that's very broad, and a too specific one, I want it to be for as many people as possible. Secondly, we do have a feedback survey at the end of the webinar, so please do fill that out. Your feedback is important for us, and it does help us form the rest of our program of content for you. So I'm just give it another few seconds. I can see most of you voted. Thank you to everyone. If you are on YouTube and on our live link, apologies, you still can't vote, but we do appreciate your attendance here nonetheless. So I'm going to let it run for about 5 more seconds. So I'll close it down in 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. And I'm just going to share the results. So interestingly, about 30% say they use them important, 30% say they don't use them, and the remaining being a smattering of use them important, with about 10% of you saying use online marketplaces and they're either not very important or neither important nor unimportant. Grace, about 30% say, well, about 50% say they use them and it's either somewhat or very important. Is this sort of what you expect based on sort of the research?
Yeah, these are very interesting answers, and of course quite a smattering of people using online marketplaces or not. And of course, some people will create their own online websites where they sell their products, and they've got that kind of separately. And I think actually the reason for the range can be that some people prefer to be able to have the services fulfilled by an online marketplaces. There's lots of amazing sort of information on marketplaces, such as seller forums, regulatory updates, and that kind of thing. And then others just prefer to have their own website. They can have more control over branding and the overall look and feel. And so there's various reasons why people might choose to use online or not. But yeah, this is probably a quite typical response of different answers based on people's own preference, basically.
Brilliant, thank you very much for that answer. Well, without further ado, I'm just going to hand over to Grace for her section of the presentation. Over to you, Grace.
Thank you very much, Phil. And basically, I just wanted to quickly go through a bit of background to the E-commerce Trade Commission, because obviously we have launched a report today looking at how we can support small businesses to grow via e-commerce. But it's helpful to just have a bit of background as to how this report came about and who we are at the E-commerce Trade Commission. So I'm Grace, I'm the UK Public Affairs Lead at the Chartered Institute of Export and International Trade, and we have convened the E-commerce Trade Commission now for the past 2 years. It was essentially created to encourage and support businesses to export online. And we've sought throughout our kind of 2-year life cycle to address existing trade barriers, speak to businesses to identify ways to simplify trade processes, and to incentivize particularly small businesses to participate in international e-commerce. Next slide, please. So why did we set ourselves up? There can obviously be a lot of criticism of different groups setting up just for the sake of it, but we wanted to have a really intentional focus. And essentially, the Social Market Foundation conducted a report in November 2022, commissioned by Amazon, looking at the power of e-commerce in the UK economy. And it recommended a few different policy measures and suggestions for structures within government as well. One of these recommendations was actually to create an office for e-commerce and digital trade. And whilst that particular recommendation didn't go ahead, there is a dedicated team within DBT which covers these policy areas. And linked to that recommendation, there was a recommendation about a time-limited e-commerce exports task force, bringing together relevant industry and civil society representatives to advise the government on policy priorities for e-commerce specifically. And so that is how the Commission essentially came about, because we decided to act on that recommendation and bring together this task force called the E-commerce Trade Commission. And that initial paper, as Phil highlighted at the beginning, also found that there are 70,000 small businesses in the UK who could be exporting but who currently aren't. And if they could use e-commerce as an avenue for starting out in e-commerce, it would be worth 9.3 billion in GVA add by SMEs exporting. Next slide, please. So who are we? Well, we've got a range of members. Those photos might seem a bit misleading. It looks like we've potentially lost a few members from one photo to another, but it's just who is available on each day. We launched under the previous administration with Secretary of State, then Kemi Badenoch, and we've continued to have great support from government throughout the life cycle of the Commission. Recently met with Minister Thomas to talk through some of the recommendations which were going to come out in this paper. So the members of the Commission, as you can see on the screen, are the Association of International Courier and Express Services, Alibaba, who we've got on the webinar with us today, Amazon, eBay, FSB, Google, the Institute of Chartered Accountants in England and Wales, who we have an event with tonight, and Shopify. We obviously serve as the chair at the Chartered Institute, and we very intentionally wanted to make sure that DBT was included on the Commission for that ease of policy feedback, directly to policymakers, and so that we could try and make sure that some of the recommendations throughout the Commission's life cycle were implemented. Next slide, please. When? As I mentioned on the other side, we are a time-limited task force. it's a 2-year mandate, so it's actually ending this week. We've had 2 great years going around the country, talking to businesses in all nations and regions to get their feedback on where the barriers are in growing through e-commerce and where potential opportunities are as well. We've had lots of speaking engagements to highlight the benefits of e-commerce for growth, whether that be at Retail Without Borders, e-commerce expo, or specific events in nations around the UK. Next slide, please. So as I mentioned, we've had evidence sessions to gather some of this evidence. We've also had policy-specific working groups led by different members of the Commission. So we had a financial services working group led by us, an AI and emerging tech working group led by Google, resilient supply chains led by Amazon, and emerging markets, which DBT led. And so that's been over the past 2 years and has fed into research across both the policy papers that we did both last year and this year. We've also done awareness raising about the power of e-commerce. We instituted e-commerce exports week last year, but have continued it this year as kind of a marker in the year to have a campaign and get partners around various e-commerce growth messages. And finally, and quite excitingly, I think today, we have been working on an e-commerce resource hub for businesses which are either starting out on their e-commerce exporting journey and needing support, or who are already exporting online but want to understand how they can grow their business. You may have seen on the QR codes earlier, which we'll bring up again in due course. There was a link to that hub. It's just gone live today, and we've worked in partnership with all the Commission board members on this and with DBT to make sure that everything aligns with resources which are already out there. So please do go and explore that. We'll be constantly updating it to make sure that it's relevant and that new regulatory changes are taken into account. But this was off the back of a recommendation actually in our first year policy paper, which the Commission did last year, to have an online resource hub specifically for e-commerce exporting. Next slide, please. Now, I'm not going to say too much on this because Richard is the report author and so knows the detail of the report inside out. But our final report, which we're launching today, essentially draws together work that the E-commerce Trade Commission has been doing over the past couple of years, looking at evidence from the regional roundtables we've done, from the working groups, from 4 sectoral focus groups covering retail, manufacturing, wholesale, expert interviews, and of course, board member input. I think one of the key highlight figures from the paper is that targeted reforms and support could help 50% more UK small businesses to export goods around the world, and a potential to generate 7 billion more in overseas sales in a decade. We've got 10 key recommendations in the report with some kind of sub-recommendations underneath, so I definitely recommend you go and have a look at that. But they include measures which you'd probably expect around focused export finance products, increasing the size of the digital trade advisor network in the UK and also overseas, and some of that actually is already coming out in the industrial strategy. There's a lot of focus on expanding the overseas capabilities, and also a focused review of foreign currency exchange and cross-border payment services and how they work for SMEs currently. So that's it from me for now. Thank you, Phil.
No worries. Thank you, Grace, for running us through that. I'm just going to go to the Q&A section in a second, but while we do, we're going to run the next of our polls. So what do you think are the main benefits of online marketplaces for your business? Just while that runs, sort of a question from me. So we've obviously had a lot done in the last 2 years with the E-commerce Trade Commission. How much has changed policy-wise, really, since, between now, like what's sort of the policy landscape looking like between now and sort of when we first started?
I think that's a really interesting question to reflect on, because I was looking back earlier at some of the recommendations from the report which recommended the institution of the Commission. And since then, obviously, we've had the Commission form directly off the back of that report. We've had a new government take power. And it's interesting, in that report, there was a recommendation around an overhauling of the then DIT, Department of International Trade, which has now been co-opted and is Department of Business and Trade. Yeah, an overhaul of their web presence to make it more small business friendly around exporting. And we're already seeing change happening on that front with the government developing the Business Growth Service, which will be an online service to streamline the government's offer to small firms, saving them time and money. And likewise, I think we've seen it with the developments more internationally as well. So there was a recommendation, again, in that first report around pushing for agreement on the ratification of the e-commerce agreement under the WTO. And in July 2024, that became a reality with the UK and 90 other countries negotiating a new set of rules which are designed to make global trade faster, fairer, cheaper. So that's the e-commerce joint initiative at the WTO. So I'd say that a lot of things actually have shifted in the past 2 years, but I think with the report out today, we can see that there's still quite a lot left to do to support small businesses with exporting.
Thank you, Grace. So I'm just going to close the poll now and share the results. I'd also like to invite Richard and Christina back online. So this is quite one-sided, this result. Other main benefits, about 80%, so 78% to be precise, said improving reach / access to customers, with about 11% each saying either reducing business cost or dealing with the complexity of VAT. I guess first to you, Grace, then to you, Christine and Richard. I guess, does this surprise you? Does this have implications?
Yeah, thank you, Phil. Yes, I think improving that access to customers through online marketplaces is a major benefit. Just having that, ease of access, and also not having to work for that yourself. I suppose when you've got to do your own sort of marketing and promotion, and promote your own website, it's going to get a lot less traction potentially until you've built it up over time than it is to go via an online marketplace. And also, simply, there's a lot more people shopping online, particularly since the pandemic. So having that online reach is a great option for many businesses. I think we've seen even with Debenhams, which switched fully to online a few years ago now, there's a lot more customers floating around in that space than are sadly using the high streets at the moment. So it's trying to ensure that balance. And funnily enough, I think we've seen things go the other way with some businesses which have been purely online at the start, now also having pop-ups, physical hubs in town centres. So it can work both ways, but yeah, it doesn't surprise me that improved access to customers is probably the main benefit.
Yeah, Christine, the same thing. Does this carry any additional implications, this poll?
Yeah. So yeah, I would definitely agree with Grace. I think being able to go online, the reach. I mean, for example, okay, our platform is mainly focusing China, but then we can also see the benefit of the reach. So you go online, you don't have to be, you don't need to have a physical presence in China, but then the reach is just on a platform. Even just the cross-border, we're talking about 100 million plus, or globally, we even have like 1.3 billion active user. So you can see the impact of like getting online just by selling on marketplaces. The reach is huge.
Thank you, Christine. I'm just going to hide the results now. So Richard, the first question is for you, actually. So what are the main areas that came up in the research that small businesses raised as barriers to e-commerce exporting?
So there were, well, we ended up in the report lumping them into 4 buckets, essentially. What was quite interesting was a lot of the barriers are sort of quite well known. They weren't always sort of specific to e-commerce. They were actually more generally barriers to exports, which obviously cut across and impinge on those who are selling through channels like e-commerce, like they often do with those who aren't. So the first bucket we sort of described as export readiness, or basically the capabilities and the capacities of SMEs. So whether that's having the finance to be able to meet the costs and take the risks of becoming an exporter, or indeed whether the decision makers in businesses have the knowledge about the markets that they might be selling into, or the knowledge of how to traverse the many different complexities of sort of the expert process. The second bucket was what we called trade costs. Well, that's what all the academics call them. So that's basically your sort of traditional transaction cost type frictions. So tax, customs, regulation issues, and so on. Then there were some sort of aspects that were more perhaps e-commerce focused. So the big one that came out of the research was fraud, in particular things like counterfeiting of products that UK SMEs were selling, and that was both in the sense of it was a cost for businesses who'd experienced that, who were already exporting, but also we picked up some businesses who were actually, it was one of the reasons they didn't want to start exporting, because they were worried about their products being counterfeited. And then finally, the fourth bucket was what we called the export infrastructure. And Grace mentioned earlier one of the recommendations around cross-border payments. So part of our infrastructure bucket was cross-border payment services, also closely allied to that, the foreign exchange services that have to be used, and also the logistics services that SMEs use to get their products from the UK to the overseas market. So they were the sort of four categories of barriers that we found.
Brilliant. Thank you very much for sharing. I've just popped a link in the chat for those who wanted. You can find the full report there. Of course, it'll be launched later on today. Christina, a slight correction on my part. Alibaba Tmall is where you come from. We've actually had a question on that. So how do brands start exporting with Tmall?
Yeah, sure. Thank you. So exporting to Tmall is one of the largest B2C platform in China. So exporting to China always seem to be quite difficult. A lot of brands struggle with the regulations. So compliance rules or certificate could seem to be really complicated to a lot of brands, and also not being familiar with the market, the language barrier, different cultural, and also the logistic, and also legal entity. There's a lot of question, a lot of barrier, it seems. So with Tmall, we have a cross-border platform. So cross-border e-commerce route essentially is basically you do not really need to have Chinese legal entity in China, and you can send your products the way you're selling in the UK. Packaging, labeling, just the way you are selling, exactly the same way you're selling in the UK. So that makes it way more efficient and easier for a lot of brands. And logistic-wise, we also have a logistic department called China. It's quite straightforward, actually. Essentially, you just put your products in a bonded warehouse, which is in Fuzhou in China, and our team can also help you to drop ship the products from the bonded warehouse to the end user. That make it a lot more straightforward for brands. So actually, in fact, more than 80% of our brands start with this route. It doesn't have to be for small businesses. Actually, even big brands, this is normally typically the first step they use when they enter the China market. For example, a lot of brands, the first thing they would do would be getting themselves a partner. So this partner could be a distributor or could be a service provider. If you don't know where to find this partner, we're happy to support as well. But essentially, these partner, they are industry expert. so they know how to help you to navigate not only our platform, but also the different landscape in China, basically. So you do want to have the expertise to help you to navigate. So we can see that cross-border route is the fastest and also the most cost-effective way to help brands to get into China. So yeah, so we do see that is typically the first step that brands would do.
Thank you, Christina. This next one, I think I want to ask to everyone. So, Rich, I know you've got to leave us soon, shortly, so I'll give you the first crack at it. What are some of the areas that governments can start looking at to help businesses improve their e-commerce? Richard, go on.
Sorry. Yeah, well, maybe it's best then for me, in terms of that, maybe to say a little bit about some of the recommendations, because they're obviously the areas that the report sort of has concluded where the government can help. So, and remember, so we talked about those 4 buckets of areas where where these barriers are found. In terms of, say, for example, helping SMEs to become more export ready, to find the finance that they might need to help them invest in what they need to do to start selling into overseas markets, or to acquire the knowledge about overseas markets that they currently don't have. And Grace touched on this a little bit earlier. We recommended that there's a new suite of SME focused export finance support delivered through UK Export Finance. We recommended that there's an overhaul of the broader export support service. So as again, Grace mentioned earlier, one of the things we suggest is there's more of a focus on having export support staff overseas in UK embassies trying to open up markets for UK SMEs, but also we also talked about there's probably a more fundamental review that needs to go on around UK export support, because some calculations we did suggest that if we could increase the number of businesses that it reaches and genuinely helps quite intensively, we could up UK export sales quite considerably over a decade-long period. And then just to pick another one out, just to give another flavour, I think in terms of trying to tackle some of those trade costs, a very big one that came out of the research with SMEs was VAT. Probably no surprise to any small business on this webinar. And so there seems some obvious wins that UK governments could pursue, particularly with the EU. So, for example, trying to get the UK firms exempted from the need to have VAT representatives in some EU member states, which the Norwegians have managed. So, you know, it would seem to be in the realm of possibility if the UK government was willing and aiming to negotiate that kind of end. But I won't ramble on anymore. Just a little flavour to whet people's appetite there for the full set of recommendations.
Thanks, Richard. Just a reminder, you can have a look at that report in the link I've shared in the chat or the QR codes. But just while I say goodbye to Richard, Christina, I guess the same question to you. So do you have any areas that the governments can sort of start looking at to help people start selling more online?
Yeah, sure. So we often see like brands struggle to look for resources or like basically guidance to find out more about like how they can export, especially to China. So I think supporting local brands in cross-border trade shows and online campaigns through funding or matchmaking programs, can help them to gain visibility and build partnership on platforms like Tmall, for example.
Thank you very much. And Grace, same question to you.
Thanks, Phil. there's so many good points already from Richard and Christina there, and I do think, you know, having been to a few of the regional evidence sessions ourselves, which we ran, export finance is a huge issue, particularly for smaller businesses. And the Chartered Institute actually recently responded to a government consultation on small business access to finance, just because it's known to be such a difficulty, and particularly it can be a barrier for women, as we've shown in that response, which you can also go and read. And we recommended in that response that there needs to be an implementation of a wider range of financial arrangements tailored to the needs of small businesses, including realistic interest rates, flexible repayment terms, grace periods before payments, etc. And I think that's where I want to sort of flip your question slightly on its head, because obviously with this report, we've mainly made recommendations to government, and that's really important. But actually, there's a lot of responsibility for economic growth that lies beyond the government as well. There's a place for industry to be encouraging new initiatives. There's a place for banks to be supporting with export finance more. I think it was last month that the Chancellor met with representatives of a lot of the major banks to talk about how they can be supporting small businesses with credit, particularly post-pandemic. And so I do think, in terms of how we frame language as well about the future of e-commerce growth in the UK, we need to make sure that we're talking about government industry partnerships and how we can all be working together on growth.
Thank you very much. That's a very broad response to that question there. Just a reminder, you can drop your questions using the question function. I'm sure our panel will be delighted to answer. And you get, so Grace, just bring back the report. So you've obviously been involved in this quite heavily. What are some of the other aspects of businesses that we've received, of feedback that we've received from businesses?
Yeah, I mean, what a range of responses as we went around the country. And interestingly, sometimes responses would differ from place to place. So if you actually go to our E-commerce Trade Commission LinkedIn, you can see our kind of papers that we put out by region. I suppose one thread that stayed pretty consistent throughout all of the evidence sessions was difficulties with trading to the EU. No surprises there. Issues around VAT, issues around staying up to date on regulations as well. So, for example, with the general product safety regulation implementation, which came out of the EU earlier this year / towards the end of last year. It's very hard sometimes for small businesses in particular to keep up to date with all the changes that are coming through. And I suppose that ties into what we've tried to do with the e-commerce resource hub actually is to have more of a centralized place where these updates can filter through. Packaging requirements as well, and translation difficulties, making sure that packages are compliant and that the labeling is correct. There's a lot of sort of admin that goes into trading with EU countries, and that came out a lot throughout the evidence sessions. Also uncertainty, and I think we all know that uncertainty is just a killer in the business world. So, different quotes about tariffs. There's one here that I've got in front of me on the US tariff situation, which has obviously evolved quite a bit since the economic prosperity deal. But businesses looking at the US market and saying we're probably going to move out of it. Actually, there's so many different options anyway, and we're not going to ship to the US market until we know solidly what's going on. As I say, some of this has shifted since even that part of the report was written. But trust is an important thing in trade, and I think some of the movement that's happened on the world stage in recent months has shaken business trust. And so when they're looking at new markets, they're trying to think, okay, well, where can we go to that we know that we've got solid deals with? So I think actually the government moving on India and the EU, and then obviously with the US now as well, that's providing a bit more business confidence, and obviously we've got more detail to come out on those agreements as well, but hopefully that those start to shore up a business confidence again in different areas. But yeah, that's just a flavour. Obviously, as Richard mentioned, VAT and the cost of VAT representatives and the admin of identifying accountancy firms to handle different elements. All of this is challenging, and so it's about how we reduce red tape and also help businesses to kind of look ahead to what might be coming up, which could disrupt their trade flows.
Thank you for that. Richard sends his thanks and apologies. He's just dropped off. But yeah, thank you for listening to my description of the new report. He says, I hope everyone has a good rest of the day. I guess it's a sort of a similar question we just received. What is the main message, this is both Grace and Christina, the main message that a lot of businesses have sort of been filtering back to both of you about e-commerce exporting? What's the sort of the main driving message here? Grace, do you want to go first on this one?
Sure. I mean, a lot of it is covered in what I've just said about the responses we got through the regional evidence sessions. I think actually it's simplification. It's simplification of processes. It's simplification of how messaging is received and signposting. I think that's a huge one actually, and this kind of goes more broad than just e-commerce. So for example, there was a panel session I was at last year, and it was in Greater Manchester actually, and it was someone from the Greater Manchester Business Board talking about how there's lots of funding pots available in Greater Manchester for different types of business support, but that each year quite a significant amount of it goes unused, which is funny because often, as I said before, we talk about challenges with access to finance, which is very real in different situations, but some of that challenge is actually around signposting. And so she was kind of arguing for the need for better filtration through from regional combined authorities, from government, from I suppose trade associations such as ours, and that's where it comes back to that responsibility point that I mentioned. Ensuring that our communities, our small business communities, are fairly represented, and also that they have the information that they need passing through to them, and also tailoring that information appropriately. And I guess again, that's why we've done what we've done with the e-commerce resource hub, because we're conscious that you can go on various websites and there's a lot of information to take in, but we're trying to hone it down so that businesses which are literally looking for how do I grow my business through e-commerce in specific markets can have a more direct route in.
Thanks, Grace. Same question to you, Christina, really. So what's the main bit of feedback you've received throughout this entire process, sort of about e-commerce and exporting?
Yeah, so e-commerce is definitely a huge thing, right? E-commerce is where you can reach the customer, where people are. I mean, in this new era, you can't really ignore e-commerce, right? And I think, again, like I think I also mentioned it earlier, it's just really overwhelming for a lot of businesses, not just SME, but even like bigger businesses. It's hard to, especially for SME, it's really hard to navigate, and often with like limited capacity to try to navigate through all this information. And I think this initiative is great because it really helps like narrow down where they are looking at the tailored information. Like Grace said, it's really good because like all the information, so many different countries, they're not just assessing regulation on specific countries, right? They're also looking at opportunity, which country, where should, or like depending on the category, depending on the businesses, the nature of businesses, where should they be exporting, where the opportunity actually lies. So I think that's a great resources to help, like great tool to help the community or the businesses to move forward to be able to export.
Thank you, Christina. One question I guess I have for you, Grace, is you've obviously seen a lot about sort of broad about regionalisation. Has there been anything in the report about the differences in e-commerce regionalisation?
Yeah, I think there's some interesting findings, and obviously it really depends what the strengths of your region are. So, for example, I suppose Greater Manchester, to pick up a similar example, has many strengths in kind of the creative industries. In fact, that also came out in the government's industrial strategy yesterday. there's obviously different craft sectors, and they can be based often in the north, and so I suppose it depends wherever you are in the country and whatever communities you're in. That kind of filtered through to some of the e-commerce evidence sessions. I think particularly when we were in Scotland, we had a lot of food and drink companies, and that's a different set of challenges and opportunities again. And I suppose just on the opportunity side, because we've not also pulled out, I suppose, some of the e-commerce export opportunities that were raised in the evidence sessions. It was interesting to see that quite a lot of the evidence sessions that we held in the south of England were talking about the influence of, well, influencers actually, getting influencers to promote their products, which funnily enough hadn't cropped up in some of the earlier evidence sessions that we held, maybe in Scotland or Wales or Northern Ireland. But actually the prevalence of influencers now in helping brands who are trying to sell their products online is really growing. Obviously it can have some negative impacts as well, I suppose, in terms of cost, or you've got to be careful in terms of the contractual agreements that you have with the influencers, but it can be a major source of opportunity if you want your brand to kind of proliferate beyond what your own marketing capabilities might be. So I just thought I'd highlight that little nugget actually, which is an interesting one for businesses to maybe consider, and also considering the reach of where those influencers are in terms of markets around the world, who you're going to target.
No, thank you, Grace. That's very useful. So I'm going to ask the final question, and then I'll start wrapping things up. I guess this is it. So for Christina and Grace, I'll go to Christina first. What, I guess, is your final closing message?
Well, first I use the resources hub and definitely look information, because I think it's really valuable. The export is still, I think, especially like, well, our platform is China facing, and the opportunity is really there. Have a look at it and don't be afraid to take the first step.
Thank you, Christina. Grace, final thing to you, final thoughts.
I would give a similar message to Christina actually, in terms of just take in the case studies, particularly on the e-commerce resource hub, and be inspired. I think often, and I'm guilty of this myself in other areas of my life, we can build up a perception of a goal that we're aiming for, and we kind of self-limit and set our own blockers. And obviously there are challenges to trade. We can't pretend that they're not there. They're written out in the report, but there's also so many opportunities and so many people who want to help, whether it's us folks from the E-commerce Trade Commission, DBT, partners like Chartered Institute, FSB, BCC, ICC. I mean, there's so many. Everyone wants to support small businesses to trade, and so I just want to flag that there's support out there if you're interested and you're thinking about starting. We've talked to people who literally started their e-commerce business making products on their kitchen table. And I should say as well, one piece of feedback I had recently from a lady who came to a Women in Trade event that we had is that sometimes we glorify the success stories and we don't talk about the people who tried and failed and tried and failed. And actually, things might not necessarily go right first time. It can take trial and error, working out what markets you're going to go to, working out which platforms even that you're going to use, or whether you're going to kind of create your own website, whatever it might be, which influencers you use or don't use. But keep experimenting, because I think actually the growth potential and the chance for that also to then flow through to communities and provide wider prosperity is worth the effort.
Brilliant. Thank you very much, Grace. So firstly, a special thank you to Christina, Grace and Richard for joining us on today's webinar. I hope you found it useful. On the next slide, you can see the QR code to both the e-commerce website, so the hub that we talked about earlier, as well as the report, which should be coming through now. Please do check them both out. They're both very useful. Do remember to keep an eye on your screens for the feedback. We do value feedback tremendously. Thank you to everyone who answered a poll or asked a question during that session. It was greatly appreciated. Otherwise, thank you very much for your time. I look forward to speaking to you throughout the rest of, I hope you have a good rest of the day. Thanks, everyone.
Thanks, guys. Take care.
Bye-bye now.
Right.